My name is James Miller. I am 72 years old, and I carry the dead weight of 4.5 decades of absolute confinement on my back. Right now, as I speak to you, I feel the biting cold of the concrete rising through my legs and a chronic pain that never leaves me, reminding me that my body is rotting right along with these stone walls. I am inmate number 462, a man who has become nothing more than an institutional ghost inside this tiny cell, where the only sound that breaks the silence is the sharp metallic clatter of the iron gates at the far end of the dark corridor. I am not a movie monster. I am simply a reflection of what is left when pride defeats reason and freedom becomes a blurred, distant memory. Listen closely to what I have to say, because my voice is the only trace of life I have left. You might think your life is safe, but the truth is that the abyss is only one step away, hidden behind choices that you call normal. I am here to tell you how 3 silly attitudes, the kind many men celebrate as a sign of honor, completely destroyed my future and buried me alive before I even turned 30. Do not expect a story of glory or planned villainy from me, for what I have is the raw confession of an old man who traded the sun for concrete because of a glass ashtray and an inflated ego. Pay close attention to every word, because the time I lost in here is never coming back. But yours is still running out there. What I am about to reveal to you now is the exact price of never knowing how to back down when life finally decides to test your limit. At 26, I felt like I owned the world, even though my kingdom was just a construction site in the streets of a working-class neighborhood. I was an ordinary man, a laborer who spent the day hauling heavy loads and the nights seeking the comfort of a cold beer at the corner bar. My life had an honest and predictable rhythm. I woke up early, worked hard to pay the bills, and had a girlfriend I truly loved, a woman who saw in me a safe harbor to build a family. Back then, I didn't realize that routine is a fragile gift that can be broken by any gust of vanity. I was just another decent guy, a young man who believed that respect on the streets was the only currency that really mattered for a real man. I lived guided by 3 behaviors that I considered signs of unshakable strength and character. The first was the golden rule of the pavement: never take an insult home, because reacting to provocations was mandatory to keep your head held high. The second was the habit of drinking until I went past the point, using alcohol as a necessary escape valve to relieve the accumulated stress of 10 hours of heavy work under the sun. And the third, perhaps the most dangerous, was the absolute conviction that apologizing was a sign of extreme weakness and public humiliation. I firmly believed that a man who retreats is a man who erases himself, not understanding that true courage is not in clenching your fist, but in knowing when to open your hand and simply walk away, protecting your future and the ones you love. Looking back now, sitting in this cold cell, I realized that I wasn't a criminal by nature, but a young man who tragically confused masculinity with blind and destructive inflexibility. I thought being a man meant being a rock that doesn't move, a concrete wall that repels every impact with the same intensity. This normalcy was my foundation, a social structure where reputation was guarded like a sacred treasure, and every small offense felt like a direct attack on my existence. I didn't see the danger that lived in the small stubbornness of everyday life, or in the silent stares inside a noisy bar. To me, that was all the right way to live, a handbook of honor that I followed without question, ignoring that I was building, brick by brick, my own life prison without even having committed a crime. It was a Friday night. The bar was packed with people, cigarette smoke, and the deafening noise of a jukebox playing anything to drown out the conversations. I had already had more than enough to drink, feeling that cheap courage that alcohol brings, when I felt the dry bump on my shoulder. My mug of beer tipped over, spilling the cold liquid down my pants and across the grimy wooden counter. The man next to me, also intoxicated, just laughed in my face, without a shred of remorse or an apology that could calm my blood. In that second, the 3 stupid rules I followed aligned like a curse. I was drunk. I wouldn't accept the insult, and my pride forbade me from simply cleaning my clothes and turning my back on that stranger. The argument escalated in seconds, turning the environment into a battlefield where only my ego screamed louder than the ambient music. He gave me a shove, a gesture of defiance that, in my distorted head, demanded an immediate and violent response so that I wouldn't look like a coward in front of everyone. Instead of taking a deep breath and leaving that cursed place, my hand acted on its own, moved by a blind fury and the stupid need to have the last word. I grabbed a heavy glass ashtray, one of those solid ones scattered along the counter, and I didn't think about the consequences of using it as a weapon against a fellow man. The weight of the glass in my palm seemed to give me the power I thought I needed to restore my honor, wounded by a spilled beer. The blow was fast, but in my memory, it still happens in slow motion today, echoing the sharp crack of the glass, splitting that man's facial bone. The music stopped suddenly, as if the whole world had held its breath, and the smell of stale beer mixed with the metallic scent of the hot blood staining my trembling hands. He fell limp to the floor, like a sandbag, and the silence that followed was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard in my life, announcing the end of my existence. There, standing with my knuckles cut and my chest heaving, I knew in the depths of my soul that I had crossed a point of no return. That moment of mindless rage destroyed a stranger's future, and, in the same instant, dug the grave where I would spend the rest of my days. The adrenaline burning in my blood evaporated in a second, leaving in its place a chill down my spine that I had never felt before, not even in the harshest winters on the construction site. I saw the blue of the police lights reflecting off the shards of glass on the floor, and before I could process the scale of the tragedy, my arms were pulled back with a brutality that snapped my shoulders. The cold metal of the handcuffs cut into my wrists, a dry and final grip that seemed to seal my fate right there, on the wet hood of the patrol car. In that instant, I was no longer James, the respected worker, or the dedicated boyfriend. I was just a body being thrown into the back seat, smelling of booze and late regret. The world I knew, with its familiar colors and sounds, began to disappear through the fogged glass as the siren noise swallowed my last remnants of dignity. The shock of entering a booking cell is like taking a punch to the stomach that lasts forever, knocking all the air out of your lungs at once. The sound of the iron gate slamming behind me had a hollow echo, a metallic thud that seemed to vibrate inside my own bones, warning me that the door to my life had just closed. There, in that gray and foul cubicle, the silence began to weigh more than any bag of cement I had ever carried in construction. I sat on the cement bench, looking at my still dirty hands, and realized that the isolation had already begun, an institutional loneliness that allowed no way back. Every minute in that cell was an eternity of uncertainty, where the pride that brought me there had completely vanished, leaving only the emptiness of someone who knows they have destroyed everything. On the day of the trial, the courtroom felt like a theater where I was the only spectator of my own ruin, watching my sentence being read by a judge who barely looked me in the eyes. When I heard the words, "life imprisonment," my heart stopped beating for a second, and the floor seemed to vanish beneath my tired feet. But the physical pain of the conviction was nothing compared to the moment I looked at the gallery and saw the face of the woman I loved, now bathed in tears of disappointment and horror. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned her face with a heartbreak that cut deeper than any knife, and left the room without looking back, taking with her the last piece of sunlight that remained in my life. In her crying, I saw the absolute end of my youth, realizing that barroom pride had cost me everything. In the early years, I still had the fire of my mistake burning in my chest, that illusion that I needed to maintain a tough guy stance to survive among criminals. I thought that if I showed weakness, the system would swallow me whole. So I got into stupid fights just to reaffirm a respect that wasn't worth a piece of dry bread. The result of that bravado was months thrown into absolute isolation, locked in a hole where sunlight was a legend and my only company was my own breathing. In that total darkness, where time loses its meaning and the mind plays cruel tricks, I felt my spirit slowly breaking under the weight of the walls. I realized, too late, that such resistance was just another form of pride preventing me from seeing the depth of my fall and the futility of fighting against the cold concrete of this cursed wing. When I completed my 10th year of sentencing, reality struck me harder than any guard. The prison chaplain appeared at the bars with a look of pity, bringing the news that my mother had died of a sudden heart attack. I couldn't go to the funeral, I couldn't hold her hand, and I didn't even have the right to cry over her grave like a normal son. There, in that freezing cubicle, the reality finally hit with the weight of a mountain on my shoulders. My pride hadn't just destroyed my life, it had also killed the woman who gave me everything. She died of a broken heart, consumed by the shame of having a son rotting alive behind bars. From that day on, the silence of my cell began to have the sound of a lament that never ends, and an incurable guilt. After 3 decades of breathing the stale air of this wing, my body began to demand the price for every night spent on the thin mattress. The constant dampness of the walls brought on severe arthritis that settled into every joint, turning the simple act of tying my shoes into a painful ordeal. My fingers, which once handled heavy tools on the site, are now twisted and shaky, barely able to hold a plastic spoon during meals. Every movement I make is accompanied by a crack of pain, and the reminder that time in here is a physical enemy that devours flesh and bone. Aging in prison is watching your own decomposition in slow motion, while you lean against the concrete wall just to be able to stand up. It is the physical realization that freedom has become an impossible dream for an already broken body. Crossing the 40-year mark of being incarcerated, I became what the guards call an institutional ghost, someone who has become furniture and whom no one expects to see free again. The world outside has changed in a way that is incomprehensible to me, with technologies and rhythms that seem to come out of a movie I didn't watch. No one sends me letters anymore. The names of people I knew have vanished from the visitor lists. And my only family now is the daily count and the sirens. My existence is reduced to an endless sequence of metal trays, fluorescent lights that never go out, and the smell of cheap disinfectant. I am a man without ties, a human being forgotten by time and buried under layers of bureaucracy, while life pulses in a place where I no longer belong. I am just a number, taking up space in a corridor of silent echoes. The cruelest aspect of aging in this cell is the daily coexistence with the mental image of the family that my victim never built. While I suffer through my lonely old age, I imagine the children and grandchildren that man could be hugging right now, if I hadn't been so stupid on that Friday night. I waste away alone in the concrete, while he remains frozen in his 20s, a life interrupted because of an ashtray and an argument of absolutely no importance. The weight of wasted time is an anchor that pulls me down, forcing me to face the fact that I threw decades of sunlight into the trash for absolutely nothing. Every wrinkle on my face is a scar of a regret without a cure, an indelible mark of one who understood, too late, that the true tragedy is the silence of an entire life I erased from the map forever. I spend the nights here, staring at the peeling ceiling of this cell, fighting a silent war that no one sees. For many years, I tried to convince myself that the fault lay with the beer, bad luck, or that guy who decided to laugh in my face on that cursed night. I created excuses in my mind, feeding a comfortable lie that I was just a victim of circumstance and a system that doesn't forgive mistakes. But the truth, this cold truth that enters through the gaps in the bars, along with the dawn wind, is much sharper than any blade. I know, in the depths of my chest, that it was I who closed my hand around that ashtray. It was I who allowed a bloated ego and a twisted masculinity to guide my movements, digging this hole where I have stuck myself for nearly half a century of loneliness. The pattern that destroyed me wasn't some evil plan, but that pathetic need to always be the strongest, the man who never lowers his guard. This search for empty respect, coming from strangers who don't even remember my name, became the heaviest chain I have ever carried in these corridors. Today, the emotion that dominates my days is not anger, but an overwhelming emptiness, a feeling that I am a hollow shell, occupying a space that doesn't belong to me. I realize that pride, that thing I thought protected me, was actually my greatest jailer, keeping me trapped in a version of myself that should have died long ago. It is an exhausting battle to admit that my own stubbornness was the architect of every inch of this cell where I will, most likely, take my very last breath. The other day, in the noisy cafeteria, as I dragged my tired feet to the table, I saw a boy in his early 20s puff out his chest over a slice of bread. He was shouting the exact same words I used to use, as if they were a sacred shield. I don't take an insult from anyone. I felt a shiver run down my aging spine, for it was like looking at a ghost from my own past, blind and furious. I tried to approach, my voice raspy and trembling, wanting to tell him that that piece of dough wasn't worth a lifetime of concrete and cold bars. But the youth pushed me away with a cutting contempt, calling me a useless, washed-up old man who knew nothing about respect. In that shove, I saw the seed of my own tragedy blooming again in barren soil, ignoring the warning of someone who has already lost everything. That night, back in the isolation of my cramped cell, I heard the echoes of the screams and the banging of tin cups coming from the wing, but my heart was elsewhere. I cried in silence, letting the warm tears wash away some of the decades of dust that had accumulated on my weary soul. I walked to the sink and looked at my own wrinkled face, reflected in that stainless steel mirror, dull and scratched by time. I realized, with a pain that no medicine can relieve, the absolute futility of the pride that brought me here, turning a strong man into a remnant of a person. I destroyed 2 entire lives, mine and that of the victim, over a moment of insane anger that today I can barely remember the details of. The mirror did not lie. I was the living monument of a shameful defeat. The lesson that life has given me in here, engraved into every inch of this cell, is that a man's true strength does not lie in the speed of his response to an insult. For decades, I believed that lowering my head was a way of dying. But the truth is that dying is spending 46 years watching the sun rise through steel bars because of 5 minutes of pride. Today, looking at my shaking hands, I realized that the greatest proof of courage I could have given in that bar would have been the simple act of taking a deep breath and walking away. The respect of strangers is worth nothing when the door of your life closes and you trade the touch of those you love for the cold of concrete. Knowing how to back down is not weakness. It is protecting your tomorrow from the claws of an impulsive and blind today. The ruin of a life rarely starts with major crimes. It enters through the front door, disguised as small stubbornness, the silly desire to have the last word, or a refusal to apologize. What I understood, too late to change my fate, is that justified pride is the most dangerous trap a man can set for himself. We spend our lives building dreams and families, only to throw it all in the trash over a moment of anger that won't even matter tomorrow. Time is the only resource that does not accept negotiation, and every second I spent here screaming at the walls was a second I took from my own existence. Don't let a small spark of irritation burn down the entire forest of your future, because the ashes that remain are cold, lonely, and far too heavy to carry on your own. I look at you now, through this invisible lens, and I see someone who still has the luxury of choosing their own path. You have probably felt that fire rise up your neck today, maybe in traffic, in a silly argument with your spouse, or at work, feeling like you needed to get even. I beg of you, stop and look at your hands before they do something your mind cannot undo. Evaluate those small, stubborn acts you justify as honor or not taking an insult. What you are protecting is a fragile ego that won't visit you in jail or hug you in your old age. Every time you choose to have the last word, you are gambling your freedom against a prize that is worth absolutely nothing. Don't wait until you're 70 to understand that the silence of walking away is the most valuable sound in life. The corridor is darkening, and I already hear the jingle of keys approaching, the sign that my voice must fall silent for the iron to reign once again. I will keep sitting on this cold bed, waiting for a tomorrow identical to today, while you have the whole world waiting outside. Pride is a silent cell you build on the inside, and freedom only begins when you decide to open your hand instead of clenching your fist. Don't let my bitter trail become your destiny. Learn from my scars before time writes them on your face. Before the padlock clicks and the silence returns, I ask you, what is the stubbornness or harmless attitude that you keep justifying today, which deep down you know could destroy everything you have built? Comment below. Your confession might be someone else's light.